The year was 1994, and the world was buzzing with stories of glitz and glamour, but in a small town tucked away in the heart of America, a mystery was about to unfold that would grip the nation. Imagine a little girl, barely 6 years old, with a smile that could light up a room and a spark in her eyes that made everyone believe she was destined for greatness. Her name was Kaylee Monroe, a child beauty pageant star whose face was plastered on local papers and TV screens, a tiny queen in a world of sequins and tiaras. She was the kind of kid who made you believe in dreams. Her laughter was infectious, her confidence unshakable, and her future seemed brighter than the stage lights she danced under. But one chilly November evening, Kaylee vanished. No trace, no clues, just gone. The town searched frantically, neighbors, police, even strangers combed the woods and fields, calling her name into the night. Her parents, broken and desperate, pleaded on every news channel, holding up her favorite teddy bear, hoping someone, anyone, would know something. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. But 3 years later, in 1997, a dusty old cereal bowl tucked away in an attic would crack open a truth so shocking, it would rewrite everything people thought they knew about Kaylee's story. And woven into this mystery is another tale, a moment of kindness that changed a life forever. Picture this, a young black teen, Marcus, on a crowded bus, giving up his seat to a pregnant white woman. She smiles, grateful, and slips him a note. That note, those few scribbled words, would set Marcus on a path he never could have imagined. 2 stories, one small town, and a truth waiting to be uncovered. What happened to Kaylee? And what was in that note? Stick with me, because this is a story you won't believe. The air in Willow Creek, Ohio, felt heavier that November. The town was small, the kind where everyone knew your name and your business, where kids played in the streets until the streetlights flickered on. Kaylee Monroe was the town's pride, a little girl who'd already won dozens of pageant crowns by the time she was 6. Her mom, Linda, was her biggest cheerleader, stitching her dresses late into the night, curling her hair just right for every competition. Linda wasn't just a stage mom, she was Kaylee's rock, her protector, always whispering, "You're my star, baby," before every performance. Her dad, Tom, was quieter, a mechanic who worked long hours but never missed a chance to cheer from the back of the auditorium, his calloused hands clapping louder than anyone else. Kaylee wasn't just their daughter, she was their world. She had this way of making everyone feel special, whether it was waving to the crowd or hugging a shy kid backstage. The pageants weren't just about beauty, they were about Kaylee's spirit, her ability to make people believe in something bigger. So when she disappeared after a rehearsal at the community center, it wasn't just a family that broke, it was the whole town. The police set up a command center, volunteers handed out flyers, and the news ran her picture non-stop. Big brown eyes, a tiara perched on her curls, and that smile. People whispered theories. Had she wandered off? Was it a stranger? Or, worse, someone they all knew? The not knowing ate at everyone, especially Linda, who stopped sleeping, her eyes hollow as she clutched Kaylee's favorite pink blanket, praying for a miracle. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek tried to move on, but it wasn't the same. The community center, where Kaylee had last been seen, felt haunted. Kids stopped playing near it, and parents held their own children a little tighter. The pageants kept going, but they felt empty without Kaylee's giggle echoing backstage. Rumors swirled, some said she'd been kidnapped, others thought she'd run away, too young to know better. A few even pointed fingers at Linda and Tom, whispering that no parent could be that perfect. But the Monroes were falling apart, their home a shrine to Kaylee's memory, her room untouched, her toys waiting. Linda would sit in the attic sometimes, surrounded by boxes of old pageant dresses, sobbing into the silence. It was in that attic, 3 years later, that she'd find something that would turn her world upside down. Not a dress, not a photo, but a cereal bowl. A simple, chipped bowl with a cartoon character on it, the kind Kaylee used to eat her Cheerios from every morning. It was tucked behind a stack of boxes, forgotten, or so it seemed. When Linda picked it up, her hands shook. Something about that bowl wasn't right. It held a clue, a tiny thread that would unravel a truth no one saw coming. Now, let's step back for a moment, because while Kaylee's story was gripping Willow Creek, another moment was quietly unfolding, one that would tie into this mystery in ways no one could predict. Marcus Jackson was 16, a kid from the other side of town, where the houses were smaller and the streets a little rougher. He wasn't a pageant kid or a local celebrity, just a regular teen trying to get through high school, help his mom with the bills, and stay out of trouble. Marcus had a good heart, the kind that noticed things others missed. One day, on a packed bus heading downtown, he saw a pregnant woman struggling to stand, her hands full with bags. Without a second thought, he stood up and offered her his seat. She looked at him, surprised, maybe because kindness like that felt rare in a world moving so fast. She sat down, smiled, and before she got off at her stop, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "Read this later," she said softly, her eyes holding something Marcus couldn't quite place. He shoved the note in his pocket, not thinking much of it until he got home. When he unfolded it, his heart skipped a beat. The words written there weren't just a thank you, they were a key to something bigger, something that would pull Marcus into a story far beyond that bus ride. Back to Kaylee. By 1997, the town had started to move on, though the ache of her absence never really faded. The flyers with her face were tattered, peeling off telephone poles, and the news had shifted to other stories. Linda and Tom were shadows of themselves, holding on to hope but drowning in grief. The attic where Linda found the cereal bowl wasn't a place they went often, it was too painful, filled with memories of Kaylee's laughter. But that day, something drew Linda there, maybe instinct, maybe desperation. She was sorting through boxes, looking for anything that might feel like a piece of her daughter, when she saw it, the bowl, sitting alone like it had been waiting for her. At first, she thought it was just another painful reminder, but when she picked it up, she noticed something strange. There was a faint mark on the bottom, not a scratch but something deliberate, like a message scratched into the ceramic. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a bowl, it was a clue, a whisper from the past that could lead to answers. But what did it mean? And why was it hidden in the attic, of all places? Marcus's story, meanwhile, was taking a turn he never expected. That note from the woman on the bus wasn't just a kind gesture, it was a lifeline. It wasn't money or a job offer, but something more personal, something that made Marcus feel seen in a way he never had before. He carried it with him, reading it over and over, wondering who this woman was and why she'd chosen him. He didn't know it yet, but that note was a thread connecting him to Kaylee's story, to the mystery that had haunted Willow Creek for years. The woman on the bus, the cereal bowl in the attic, the little girl who vanished, they were all pieces of a puzzle, scattered across time and chance, waiting to be put together. But how? And who was pulling the strings? The town of Willow Creek wasn't ready for what was coming. The cereal bowl wasn't just a relic, it was a spark that would ignite questions no one had dared to ask. Was Kaylee still out there? Had someone taken her? Or was the truth even stranger? And Marcus, the kid who just wanted to do the right thing, what did his note have to do with a missing girl? The answers were closer than anyone realized, but they came with a cost. As Linda stared at that bowl, her hands trembling, she knew she was holding something that could change everything. And Marcus, clutching that note, was about to step into a story bigger than himself. 2 lives, 2 moments, 1 truth waiting to be uncovered. What was scratched into that bowl? What did the note say? And what really happened to Kaylee Monroe? You'll have to stick around to find out, because this story is just getting started, and the truth is wilder than you think. Linda Monroe stood frozen in the attic, the cereal bowl trembling in her hands. The dim light from a single bulb cast long shadows across the dusty boxes, and the air felt thick with memories. That bowl, it was Kaylee's, no question. She could still picture her daughter at the kitchen table, swinging her little legs as she scooped up Cheerios, giggling about some silly cartoon. But why was it here, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and forgotten Christmas decorations? And that mark on the bottom, scratched into the ceramic like a secret someone didn't want found, it wasn't random. It looked like letters, maybe numbers, but in the faint light, Linda couldn't make them out. Her heart pounded as she traced her finger over the rough edges. This wasn't just a relic of her daughter's life, it was something more, something that made her stomach twist with both hope and dread. She wanted to run downstairs, call the police, scream for Tom, but her legs wouldn't move. What if this was nothing? What if it was everything? 3 years of sleepless nights, of wondering where her baby was, had worn her down to a shadow of herself. But this bowl, this tiny piece of Kaylee's world, felt like a lifeline. She clutched it tighter, afraid to let go, afraid to believe it might mean something. Downstairs, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that had settled over their lives since Kaylee disappeared. Tom was at the garage, working late again, trying to keep his hands busy so his mind wouldn't wander to the what-ifs. Linda knew she had to show him, but first, she needed to understand what she was holding. She needed to know if this was a clue to what happened that night in 1994 when their world fell apart. Across town, Marcus Jackson sat on the edge of his bed, the note from the bus crumpled in his hand. He'd read it 100 times since that day, each time hoping it would make more sense, but it only left him with more questions. The words were simple, written in hurried, loopy handwriting. "You're a good soul, Marcus. Find the truth at 1427 Maple. It's time." No name, no explanation, just an address and a cryptic message that felt heavier than it should. Marcus wasn't the type to chase mysteries, he had enough to deal with, between school, his part-time job at the diner, and helping his mom keep the lights on. But something about that note stuck with him, like it was meant for him and him alone. The woman on the bus, with her tired eyes and quiet smile, didn't seem like someone playing a prank. She'd looked at him like she knew him, like she saw something in him he didn't see in himself. He'd gone to 1427 Maple once, just to check it out, but it was just an old house, boarded up and empty, the kind of place kids dared each other to sneak into. Nothing about it screamed truth, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket, same as he did every day, like a talisman. His mom called from the kitchen, asking if he'd finished his homework, but Marcus barely heard her. His mind was on that address, on the woman, and on the nagging sense that he was part of something bigger, something tied to the whispers he'd heard about a little girl who vanished years ago. Back in 1994, Willow Creek had been a different place. It wasn't just Kaylee's disappearance that changed it, it was the way the town turned on itself afterward. Neighbors who'd once shared coffee and gossip started looking at each other with suspicion. The community center, where Kaylee had last been seen, became a place people avoided, its faded sign a constant reminder of the night everything went wrong. Kaylee had been at a pageant rehearsal, practicing her dance routine, her pink dress sparkling under the fluorescent lights. Linda had been there, chatting with other moms, but she'd stepped outside for just a moment to take a call from Tom. It was 5 minutes, maybe 10, but when she came back, Kaylee was gone. Her tiara was on the floor, one rhinestone missing, and her little backpack was still by the stage. The police searched every inch of the building, the parking lot, the woods nearby, but there was nothing, no footprints, no witnesses, no sign of a struggle. It was like Kaylee had vanished into thin air. The lead detective, a gruff man named Carl Ramsey, promised the Monroes he'd find her, but even he seemed stumped. He'd sit with Linda and Tom late into the night, going over every detail, every person who'd been at the center that evening. There was the janitor, who swore he'd locked the back door, the pageant coach, a nervous woman who kept saying she'd only turned her back for a second, and a handful of other parents, all vouching for each other. But someone wasn't telling the truth, or maybe they didn't know they knew it. The town tried to rally around the Monroes, but grief has a way of splitting people apart. Some folks brought casseroles and prayers, others whispered that Linda was too pushy with the pageants, that maybe Kaylee had run off to escape the pressure. Tom heard the rumors and got into more than one shouting match at the local bar, his knuckles bruised from defending his family. The worst was the anonymous letters, cruel notes slipped under their door, accusing them of knowing more than they let on. Linda stopped opening the mail after a while, but the words stuck. What kind of mother lets her child disappear? She carried that guilt like a stone, replaying that night over and over, wondering if she'd stayed inside, if she'd held Kaylee's hand, if she'd just been better. By 1997, the Monroes were barely holding on. Tom worked longer hours, Linda rarely left the house, and their marriage was a fragile thread stretched to breaking. The cereal bowl, though, that changed something in Linda. It was the first time in years she felt a spark of something other than despair. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew it was important. She wrapped the bowl in an old towel and hid it in her dresser, not ready to tell Tom until she was sure. She needed to be sure. Marcus, meanwhile, was starting to feel like the note was more than a random act of kindness. He'd heard about Kaylee Monroe growing up. Everyone in Willow Creek had. Her face was still on faded posters around town, a ghost that never quite left. Marcus was too young to remember the details, but he knew the story: a little girl, a pageant star, gone without a trace. His mom used to say it was the kind of thing that made you lock your doors at night, even in a place like Willow Creek. Marcus didn't know why, but the note in his pocket felt tied to that story. Maybe it was the address. 1427 Maple wasn't far from the community center, maybe a 10-minute walk. He'd never connected the dots before, but now he couldn't stop thinking about it. He started asking around, casually, not wanting to seem too curious. His friend Jamal, who worked at the gas station, said the house on Maple had been empty for years, ever since some old lady moved away. Creepy place, man, Jamal said, shaking his head. Kids say it's haunted. Marcus laughed it off, but he couldn't ignore the chill that ran through him. He decided to go back to 1427 Maple, this time with a flashlight and a little more courage. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he had to see it again, had to know if the note was leading him somewhere real. Linda couldn't stop thinking about the bowl. She waited until Tom was asleep, then crept downstairs to the kitchen, where the light was better. She unwrapped the towel and held the bowl up, tilting it to catch the glow from the bulb above the sink. The scratches were clearer now, a series of letters and numbers, uneven and shaky, like they'd been carved with a nail or a knife. KM 11 to 94 was part of it, and then something else, maybe a word, but it was too worn to read. KM, Kaylee Monroe? November 1994? That was the month she disappeared. Linda's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the bowl. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had written this, hidden it, left it for her to find, or maybe not for her, but for someone. She thought about calling Detective Ramsey, but he'd retired last year, and the new cops didn't seem to care about a case gone cold. She thought about the community center, the people there that night, the ones who'd looked at her with pity or suspicion. Could one of them know something? Could this bowl be a message from Kaylee herself? The thought made her chest ache, a mix of hope and fear so strong she could barely breathe. She needed answers, but she didn't know where to start. All she knew was that this bowl was a piece of the puzzle, and she wasn't letting it go. Marcus stood outside 1427 Maple, the flashlight in his hand casting a weak beam across the overgrown yard. The house looked worse in the dark, its windows boarded, the paint peeling like old skin. He felt stupid standing there, like a kid chasing a ghost story, but the note burned in his pocket. Find the truth. He stepped closer, his sneakers crunching on the gravel, and tried the front door. Locked, of course. He circled around to the back, where a loose board hung over a window. His heart was racing now, but he couldn't turn back. He pried the board loose, wincing at the creak, and peered inside. It was too dark to see much, just shapes, maybe furniture, maybe nothing. He climbed through, careful not to cut himself on the jagged wood, and stood in what felt like a living room. The air smelled of dust and something sour, and the silence was so heavy it pressed against his ears. He swung the flashlight around, catching glimpses of a sagging couch, a broken lamp, a staircase leading up to darkness. Then he saw it, a small door under the stairs, barely noticeable, like it was meant to be missed. His mouth went dry. The note had led him here, but what was he supposed to find? He took a step toward the door, his hand shaking, when a sound stopped him cold, a creak, like someone else was in the house. Linda sat at the kitchen table, the bowl in front of her, her mind racing. She hadn't told Tom yet, couldn't bring herself to. He'd been so angry lately, not at her but at the world, at the unfairness of it all. She didn't want to give him false hope, not until she knew more. But she couldn't do this alone. She thought about the people in town, the ones who'd been at the community center that night. There was Mrs. Hargrove, the pageant coach, who always seemed nervous, like she was hiding something. There was the janitor, Mr. Ellis, who'd left town a year after Kaylee disappeared, saying he couldn't handle the memories. And then there was the woman who'd been at the rehearsal, a quiet stranger who'd helped with the props but never came back after that night. Linda didn't even know her name, but she remembered her eyes, sharp, like she was watching everything. Could she have something to do with this? And what about the bowl? Why was it hidden? Linda's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, sharp and urgent. It was late, too late for visitors. She froze, her hand on the bowl, her heart in her throat. Who was out there? And what did they know? Marcus spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room. The creak came again, louder, from upstairs. He wanted to run, to climb back out the window and forget this place, but the note kept him rooted. It's time. He gripped the flashlight tighter and moved toward the small door under the stairs. It wasn't locked, but it stuck, like it hadn't been opened in years. He pulled hard, and it gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. A basement. His stomach twisted. Every instinct told him to leave, but he thought of the woman on the bus, her eyes, her words. He took a step down, then another, the air growing colder with each one. The beam of his flashlight caught something at the bottom, a box, small and metal, like an old lockbox. His breath hitched. Was this what he was supposed to find? He reached for it, his fingers brushing the cold surface, when the creak came again, closer this time, right behind him. He turned, the flashlight shaking in his hand, and saw nothing but darkness. But he wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was in that house with him, and the truth, whatever it was closer than ever. But so was the danger. Marcus froze, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark basement, the metal lockbox cold under his fingertips. The creak from upstairs echoed in his ears, too close, too real. His heart hammered so loud he was sure whoever, or whatever, was in the house could hear it. He wanted to bolt, to scramble back up the stairs and out the window, but the note in his pocket felt like a weight, anchoring him. Find the truth at 1427 Maple. It's time. The woman's words looped in his mind, her voice soft but urgent, like she'd been waiting for him to take this step. He didn't know how, but this house, this box, was part of something bigger, maybe even tied to Kaylee Monroe, the girl whose disappearance still haunted Willow Creek. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, his breath shallow, and listened. The creak didn't come again, but the silence was worse, heavy with the feeling of being watched. He crouched by the lockbox, his hands shaking as he tried to pry it open. It was rusted, stubborn, but there was a faint click when he pressed the latch. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and something else, a small, shiny object that caught the light. A rhinestone, like the kind you'd see on a pageant tiara. His stomach dropped. Was this Kaylee's? Before he could process it, another sound, a shuffle, deliberate, from the top of the stairs. Someone was there. Marcus shoved the paper and rhinestone into his pocket, his pulse racing, and backed away from the box. He didn't know what he'd found, but he knew he wasn't alone, and whatever was in this house didn't want him here. Back at the Monroe house, Linda clutched the cereal bowl, her eyes fixed on the scratches, KM 11-94. The knock at the door had stopped, but her nerves were still on edge. It was past midnight, and Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people showed up unannounced at this hour. She crept to the living room, peering through the curtains, but the street was empty, the porch light casting a weak glow over the front yard. Her mind raced. Was it a neighbor? A prank? Or something else, someone who knew she'd found the bowl? She hadn't told anyone, not even Tom, but the weight of keeping it secret was crushing her. She needed to talk to someone, to make sense of this clue, but who could she trust? The town had turned on her and Tom after Kaylee vanished, whispering accusations, pointing fingers. Even Detective Ramsey, who'd been kind at first, had started looking at her differently by the end, like he wondered if she'd missed something obvious that night at the community center. Linda set the bowl on the coffee table and sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. She thought about the people at the rehearsal that night, Mrs. Hargrove, the pageant coach, always fidgeting with her glasses, Mr. Ellis, the janitor, who'd left town so suddenly, and that quiet woman, the one with the sharp eyes who'd helped with the props. Linda hadn't seen her since, but her face stuck in her memory, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She needed to find her, to ask questions, but where would she even start? The knock came again, sharper this time, and Linda's heart leapt. She grabbed the bowl, hiding it under a cushion, and moved toward the door, her hand hovering over the knob. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. No answer, just the wind rattling the porch swing. Marcus was halfway up the basement stairs when the shuffle turned into footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor above. He killed the flashlight, plunging himself into darkness, and pressed himself against the wall. His mind raced. Had someone followed him? Was it the woman from the bus, or someone else entirely? He thought about the rhinestone in his pocket, the paper he hadn't read yet. If this was about Kaylee, he was in over his head. He wasn't a detective, just a kid who'd done a kind thing on a bus and gotten a note that led him here. But he couldn't leave now, not when he was this close to something. He crept up the last few steps, his sneakers silent on the worn wood, and peered through the crack in the door. The living room was empty, but a shadow moved across the wall, long and distorted, like someone pacing. Marcus's mouth went dry. He didn't have a plan, didn't even know what he was looking for, but he couldn't stay in the basement. He pushed the door open, wincing at the faint creak, and stepped into the room. The air was colder here, the smell of dust stronger. He scanned the space, his eyes catching on a stack of old newspapers in the corner, their headlines faded but familiar, "Local girl missing. Search continues for Kaylee Monroe." His heart sank. This house wasn't just abandoned, it was a graveyard of memories, a place tied to the town's darkest moment. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, Marcus thought he was safe. Then a voice, low and raspy, came from the staircase. "You shouldn't be here, kid." Linda opened the door a crack, her breath catching when she saw no one. The porch was empty, but a piece of paper fluttered on the welcome mat, held down by a small rock. She hesitated, then grabbed it, slamming the door shut and locking it. Her hands shook as she unfolded the note. It was handwritten, the ink smudged but legible. "Stop looking, Linda. Some truths are better left buried." No signature, just those words, sharp and cold like a knife. She dropped the note, her knees weak, and sank to the floor. Someone knew she'd found the bowl. Someone was watching her. She thought about the cereal bowl, the scratches, the date, KM 11-94. It wasn't just a clue, it was a warning, or maybe a plea. She needed to tell Tom, but he was still at the garage, and the idea of being alone in the house with that note, that bowl, was too much. She grabbed her coat and the bowl, wrapping it in the towel again, and headed for her car. She didn't know where she was going, maybe to the police, maybe to find Mrs. Hargrove or someone who'd been at the community center that night. She just knew she couldn't stay here, not with that note burning a hole in her mind. As she drove through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, she passed the community center, its windows dark, its sign weathered. She slowed, her eyes lingering on the building. That was where it all started, where Kaylee's laugh had echoed for the last time. Maybe the answers were there, hidden in plain sight. Marcus spun toward the voice, his flashlight flicking on, catching a glimpse of a figure at the top of the stairs. It was too dark to see a face, but the shape was tall, broad, maybe a man. "Who are you?" Marcus called, his voice cracking but firm. He backed toward the window he'd climbed through, his hand clutching the paper and rhinestone in his pocket. The figure didn't move, just stood there, a shadow against the darkness. "I said, you shouldn't be here," the voice repeated, slower this time, like a warning. Marcus's mind raced. He thought about the note, the address, the rhinestone that might belong to Kaylee. Was this person connected to her disappearance? Or were they just some squatter, guarding this empty house? He didn't wait to find out. He lunged for the window, scrambling over the sill, his hands scraping against the jagged wood. He hit the ground outside, his breath ragged, and ran, not stopping until he was blocks away, the house a dark silhouette behind him. He leaned against a street lamp, panting, and pulled the paper from his pocket. It was a letter, old and brittle, addressed to someone named Eleanor. The words were faded, but he caught phrases: "I'm sorry, had to protect her, they'll never understand." His hands shook as he read, the rhinestone glinting in his palm. This wasn't just about a missing girl, it was bigger, messier, and Marcus was caught in the middle. Linda pulled into the community center parking lot, the cereal bowl on the passenger seat. The building looked smaller than she remembered, sadder, like it had given up too. She hadn't been here since that night, couldn't bear to face the place where she'd lost her daughter. But the bowl, the note on her porch, they were pulling her back, forcing her to confront the past. She stepped out of the car, the bowl in her hands, and walked toward the entrance. The doors were locked, but she pressed her face against the glass, peering inside. The stage was still there, dusty and bare, where Kaylee had twirled in her pink dress. Linda's eyes stung with tears, but she pushed them back. She needed to focus. She circled the building, her flashlight catching on the back door, the one Mr. Ellis, the janitor, swore he'd locked that night. It was rusted now, but it gave way when she pushed, creaking open to reveal a dark hallway. Her heart pounded. She shouldn't be here, not alone, not at night, but the bowl was her guide, its scratches a map she didn't yet understand. She stepped inside, the air cold and stale, and moved toward the auditorium. That's when she saw it, a child's shoe, small and pink, half hidden under a pile of old props. Her breath caught. It was Kaylee's, one of the pair she'd worn that night. Linda dropped to her knees, the bowl slipping from her hands, and reached for the shoe, her fingers trembling. Was this another clue, or just another piece of her broken heart? Across town, Marcus sat in his room, the letter and rhinestone on his desk. He hadn't told anyone about the house, not even Jamal. The voice in the dark, the letter, the rhinestone, it was too much, too real. He read the letter again, trying to make sense of it. Who was Eleanor? And what did protect her mean? He thought about Kaylee, about the stories his mom told, about how the town had never recovered. He thought about the woman on the bus, her eyes, her note. Was she Eleanor? Or someone else, someone who knew what happened to Kaylee? Marcus didn't know, but he couldn't let it go. He needed to go back to 1427 Maple, to face whoever was in that house, to find out what the letter meant. But he was scared of what he'd find, scared of what it would mean for him, for his family, for Willow Creek. He tucked the letter and rhinestone into a drawer, promising himself he'd go back tomorrow, when the sun was up and the world felt safer. But deep down, he knew safety was an illusion, not when the truth was this close. Linda sat on the community center floor, the pink shoe in one hand, the cereal bowl in the other. The scratches on the bowl seemed to glow in the dim light, KM 11 to 94, a message she couldn't decode but couldn't ignore. She thought about the note on her porch, "Stop looking, Linda." Someone didn't want her to find the truth, but why? Who was trying to keep her in the dark? She stood, her legs shaky, and moved deeper into the building, her flashlight sweeping the shadows. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she felt Kaylee here, like her daughter's spirit was guiding her. The auditorium was a maze of memories, stage lights, glitter, the sound of Kaylee's laugh. Linda stopped by the stage, her eyes catching on something else, a scrap of fabric, pink and sparkly, caught in a crack in the floorboards. Her heart stopped. It was from Kaylee's dress, the one she'd worn that night. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the sequins, when she heard a noise, a faint rustle, like someone moving in the dark. She spun around, her flashlight shaking, and called out, "Who's there?" The silence was deafening, but she knew she wasn't alone. Someone was watching, waiting, and the truth, whatever it was closer than ever. But so was the danger, and Linda wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. Linda's voice echoed in the empty auditorium, "Who's there?" But the only answer was the faint hum of the wind slipping through the community center's cracked windows. Her flashlight trembled in her hand, the beam darting across the stage, catching the glint of sequins on the scrap of pink fabric she'd pulled from the floorboards. It was Kaylee's dress, or a piece of it, no doubt about it, she'd sewn those sequins herself, late at night, her fingers pricked from the needle. The pink shoe, the cereal bowl with its cryptic scratches, and now this fabric, they were pieces of her daughter, scattered like breadcrumbs leading somewhere she wasn't sure she wanted to go. Her heart pounded, a mix of hope and terror, as she clutched the shoe and bowl tighter. The rustle came again, closer now, from the wings of the stage, where the curtains hung heavy with dust. She swung the flashlight toward the sound, her breath catching when she saw a shadow flicker, just for a moment, but enough to make her skin crawl. "I know you're there," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you know about my daughter?" No response, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. Linda took a step toward the curtains, her sneakers scuffing against the worn wood of the stage. She didn't know what she'd find, but she couldn't turn back now, not when Kaylee's presence felt so close, like a whisper in her ear. The note on her porch, "Stop looking, Linda," burned in her mind, but it only made her more determined. Someone wanted her to stay in the dark, but she was done with shadows. She reached for the curtain, her hand shaking, when a low creak sounded behind her, from the auditorium seats. She spun around, the flashlight catching nothing but rows of empty chairs. But she wasn't alone, she could feel it, like eyes boring into her back. Marcus sat on his bed, the letter to Eleanor spread out in front of him, the rhinestone glinting under his desk lamp. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since he'd fled 1427 Maple, the raspy voice, "You shouldn't be here, kid," still ringing in his ears. He'd barely slept, his dreams filled with dark staircases and shadows that moved too fast. The letter was short but heavy, the words "I'm sorry," "had to protect her," "they'll never understand," looping in his mind like a broken record. Protect who? Kaylee? And who was Eleanor? He thought about the woman on the bus, her tired eyes, the note she'd given him, "Find the truth at 1427 Maple. It's time." Was she Eleanor, or just another piece of this puzzle? Marcus didn't know, but he couldn't ignore the rhinestone, so like the ones he'd seen in old photos of Kaylee Monroe, her tiara sparkling under stage lights. He'd gone back to the house in daylight, hoping the sun would make it less terrifying, but the boards were nailed tighter now, like someone didn't want anyone getting in again. He'd stood there, staring at the peeling paint, wondering if he should tell someone, his mom, the police, anyone. But what would he say? That a stranger gave him a note, and he broke into a creepy house and found a letter that might be about a missing girl? They'd think he was crazy, or worse, they'd ask questions he couldn't answer. He tucked the letter and rhinestone into his backpack, deciding to go to the library after school. Maybe there'd be old newspapers, records, something about 1427 Maple or Eleanor. But as he zipped the bag, his phone buzzed, a text from Jamal. "Heard someone saw lights at that old house on Maple last night. You know anything?" Marcus's stomach twisted. Someone else was watching that house, and he wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Linda pulled the curtain aside, her flashlight illuminating a narrow hallway behind the stage, lined with old props and forgotten costumes. The air was thick with dust, and her throat tightened as she stepped forward, the pink shoe and cereal bowl heavy in her arms. The rustle had stopped, but the silence was worse, like the building was holding its breath. She moved slowly, her light catching on a glittery dress hanging on a rack, so like the ones Kaylee used to wear. Her chest ached, but she pushed on, driven by the scratches on the bowl, KM 11 to 94. She'd spent all morning staring at them, trying to decode the faint word after the date, maybe help, maybe hide. It felt like Kaylee's voice, trapped in the ceramic, begging to be heard. She thought about the people at the rehearsal that night, Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Ellis, the quiet woman with the sharp eyes. She'd tracked down Mrs. Hargrove's address that morning, planning to visit her, but the community center had called her here first, like a magnet. The hallway ended at a small door, marked storage. Linda's hand hovered over the knob, her pulse racing. She didn't know why, but she felt Kaylee behind that door, closer than she'd been in 3 years. She turned the knob, the door creaking open to reveal a cramped room filled with boxes, old stage lights, and a single chair in the center, like someone had been sitting there, waiting. Her flashlight beam landed on the chair, and her breath caught a child's tiara, bent and tarnished, sat on the seat, one rhinestone missing. Linda's knees buckled. It was Kaylee's tiara, the one she'd worn that night. She reached for it, tears blurring her vision, when a hand grabbed her shoulder, cold and firm. She screamed, dropping the bowl, the ceramic shattering on the floor. Marcus walked into the Willow Creek Library, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the letter and rhinestone tucked inside. The place was quiet, the librarian, Mrs. Carter, giving him a nod as he headed for the microfilm machine. He'd never used one before, but Mrs. Carter showed him how, her voice soft like she knew he was looking for something important. He started with newspapers from November 1994, scanning headlines about Kaylee's disappearance. Child beauty star vanishes after rehearsal. Police have no leads. The articles were full of details he'd never heard: how the community center's back door was found unlocked, how a witness saw a dark car speeding away that night, how Linda Monroe collapsed during a press conference, begging for her daughter's return. Marcus's hands shook as he read, the rhinestone in his pocket feeling heavier. He moved to property records next, searching for 1427 Maple. The house had belonged to an Eleanor Whitmore, who'd lived there until 1995, when she sold it and left town. No one had lived there since. The records marked it as vacant. Marcus scribbled the name Eleanor Whitmore on a scrap of paper, his mind racing. Was she the Eleanor in the letter? And why had she left so soon after Kaylee disappeared? He was about to search for more when Mrs. Carter tapped his shoulder. "Found something, Marcus?" she asked, her eyes kind but curious. He mumbled something about a school project, but her gaze lingered, like she knew he was lying. As he left the library, the sun setting over Willow Creek, he felt eyes on him, like someone was watching from the shadows. Linda spun around, her scream echoing in the storage room, her flashlight clattering to the floor. The hand on her shoulder belonged to Mrs. Hargrove, the pageant coach, her face pale and drawn in the dim light. "Linda, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Linda backed away, her heart pounding, the shattered cereal bowl at her feet. "What are you doing here?" she shot back, her eyes darting to the tiara on the chair. Mrs. Hargrove's gaze followed, and her face crumpled, like she'd been caught. I come here sometimes," she stammered. "To think about her. About Kaylee." Linda didn't buy it. Mrs. Hargrove had always been nervous, but this was different. Her hands were shaking, her eyes avoiding Linda's. "What do you know?" Linda demanded, stepping closer. "You were there that night. You saw something, didn't you?" Mrs. Hargrove shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I swear, I didn't mean to." She cut herself off, her hand flying to her mouth. Linda's blood ran cold. "Mean to what?" she pressed, her voice low and fierce. Mrs. Hargrove backed toward the door, her breath hitching. "You don't understand, Linda. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Before Linda could stop her, Mrs. Hargrove bolted, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Linda lunged for the tiara, clutching it to her chest, and ran after her, but the hallway was empty, the back door swinging open to the night. Mrs. Hargrove was gone, but her words hung in the air, a confession that wasn't complete. Marcus stood outside 1427 Maple, the letter in his hand, the rhinestone in his pocket. He'd come back, despite the fear, because he couldn't let it go. The house looked darker now, the windows like eyes staring back. He'd spent the day piecing things together: Eleanor Whitmore, the letter, the rhinestone, the dark car from the news. He didn't know how they fit, but he knew this house held answers. He circled to the back, finding the loose board he'd climbed through before, but it was nailed shut now, fresh hammer marks glinting in the moonlight. Someone didn't want him here. He pulled at the board, his hands sweating, when a light flickered inside the house, a quick flash, like a flashlight. His heart stopped. Whoever was in there last night was back, or maybe they'd never left. He thought about the voice, the letter, the words "protect her." He needed to know who Eleanor was, what she'd done, and if Kaylee was still out there. He pried the board loose, the nails groaning, and climbed inside, his sneakers silent on the dusty floor. The house was colder now, the air thick with something he couldn't name. He moved toward the basement door, his flashlight shaking, when he heard it, a whisper, faint but clear, from upstairs. "Marcus." His blood froze. How did they know his name? He gripped the letter, his other hand on the rhinestone, and took a step toward the stairs, his breath shallow. The whisper came again, softer, like a plea. He didn't want to go up, but he had to. The truth was waiting, and he was running out of time. Linda drove through Willow Creek, the tiara in her lap, her mind reeling. Mrs. Hargrove's words, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," were a knife in her heart. What wasn't supposed to happen? Kaylee's disappearance. Something else. She needed to find her, to make her talk, but Mrs. Hargrove had vanished into the night. Linda thought about the cereal bowl, now in pieces, its scratches burned into her memory. She thought about the note on her porch, the shoe, the fabric, the tiara. They were all screaming at her, telling a story she couldn't yet read. She pulled over by the police station, her hands shaking, but stopped herself from going in. The cops hadn't believed her 3 years ago, why would they now? She needed Tom, needed someone to hold her and tell her she wasn't crazy. But Tom was at the garage, and she couldn't wait. She drove toward 1427 Maple, not knowing why, just following a gut feeling. The address had come up in her mind, something she'd overheard years ago, a place tied to whispers about Kaylee. As she turned onto Maple Street, her headlights caught a figure by the old house, a boy, climbing through a window. Her heart raced. Was he a thief? Or something else? She parked, grabbing the tiara, and stepped out, her flashlight in hand. She didn't know it, but she was about to cross paths with Marcus, and the truth, whatever it was about to explode. Marcus reached the top of the stairs, the whisper still echoing in his ears. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with dust and something sharper, like fear. His flashlight beam caught on a door, slightly ajar, light spilling from the crack. He moved toward it, his heart in his throat, the letter and rhinestone burning in his pocket. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew it was bigger than him, bigger than Willow Creek. He pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The room was small, cluttered with boxes, but in the center stood a woman, her back to him, her hair gray and tangled. She turned, her face lit by a lantern, and Marcus's breath caught. It was the woman from the bus, her eyes just as tired, just as knowing. "You found it," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "You found the truth." Marcus stepped back, his hand on the letter. "Who are you? What's this about Kaylee?" The woman's face crumpled, like she'd been carrying a weight too long. "I'm Eleanor," she said, her voice breaking. "And I'm so sorry." Before she could say more, a shout came from outside, Linda's voice, sharp and desperate. "Who's in there?" Marcus spun toward the window, his heart racing, as Eleanor grabbed his arm. "You can't tell her," she whispered. "Not yet." The room felt like it was closing in, the truth so close but still out of reach, and Marcus didn't know who to trust or if he'd make it out of this house alive. Marcus's heart slammed against his chest as Eleanor's grip tightened on his arm, her whispered plea, "You can't tell her," not yet ringing in his ears. The lantern's dim glow cast harsh shadows across her face, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear, or maybe guilt. Outside, Linda's voice cut through the night again. "Sharper now," I said, "who's in there? Come out, or I'm calling the police." Marcus's mind raced, torn between the woman in front of him, claiming to be Eleanor, and the desperate mother outside, clutching a tiara that could only belong to Kaylee Monroe. The letter in his pocket, the rhinestone, the note from the bus, they were all screaming at him, but he didn't know what they meant, not yet. Eleanor's hand trembled, her nails digging into his skin. "Marcus, listen to me," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "You don't understand what's at stake. If you tell her, it'll destroy everything." He yanked his arm free, stepping back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Destroy what? What happened to Kaylee? Did you?" He couldn't finish the question, the words too heavy. Eleanor's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. Then her eyes darted to the door, and she froze. A new sound, a low, deliberate creak, came from the hallway, not from outside, but inside the house. Marcus's blood ran cold. They weren't alone. Someone else was here, someone who'd been silent until now, and the air in the room felt like it was tightening around them. Linda stood in the overgrown yard of 1427 Maple, her flashlight beam trained on the boarded-up window where she'd seen the boy disappear. The tiara in her hand felt like a lifeline, its bent frame and missing rhinestone proof that Kaylee had been here, or at least her things had. Her scream for whoever was inside had gone unanswered, but she wasn't leaving, not now. She'd spent 3 years in a fog of grief, and tonight, with the cereal bowl shattered, the pink shoe, the scrap of fabric, and now this tiara, she was awake, alive, and ready to fight for answers. She took a step closer to the house, her sneakers crunching on the gravel, when a flicker of light caught her eye, not from the window, but from the side of the house, where a rusted cellar door lay half hidden in the weeds. Her breath hitched. Had it been open before? She swung her flashlight toward it, the beam catching on fresh scratches in the metal, like someone had pried it open recently. Her gut twisted. The note on her porch, "Stop looking, Linda," flashed in her mind, but so did Mrs. Hargrove's panicked words, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Linda didn't know what connected this house to her daughter, but she felt it, like a pull she couldn't ignore. She glanced back at the window, then at the cellar door, her heart pounding. She needed to find the boy, to know what he was doing here, but the cellar door was calling her, whispering Kaylee's name. She moved toward it, her hands shaking, unaware that inside the house, Marcus was facing a truth that could shatter everything she thought she knew. Marcus spun toward the creek, his flashlight slicing through the dark hallway. Eleanor grabbed his arm again, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't move," she said, her eyes locked on the door. The creak came again, closer, like footsteps on the old floorboards, slow and deliberate. Marcus's mouth went dry. He thought of the raspy voice from his first night here, "You shouldn't be here, kid," and wondered if it was the same person, or someone new. He whispered, "Who's that?" But Eleanor shook her head, her face pale. "They can't know you're here," she mouthed, pulling him toward a stack of boxes in the corner. Marcus resisted, his mind reeling. "Who's they? What's going on?" Eleanor's eyes darted to the letter in his hand, then back to the door. "I tried to protect her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I could keep her safe, but I was wrong." Before Marcus could ask more, the door swung open, and a figure stepped into the light, a man, tall and gaunt, his face half hidden in shadow. Marcus's heart stopped. It was Mr. Ellis, the janitor from the community center, the one who'd left town after Kaylee disappeared. His eyes locked on Eleanor, then Marcus, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice low and rough. "Looks like we've got a problem." Marcus's hand tightened on the rhinestone in his pocket, his mind screaming one question: what did this man have to do with Kaylee? Linda reached the cellar door, her flashlight trembling as she traced the scratches in the metal. They were fresh, deep, like someone had been desperate to get in or out. She set the tiara down, her hands shaking, and pulled at the handle. It was heavy, rusted, but it gave way with a groan, revealing a dark staircase leading down. The air that rushed up was cold, damp, and carried a faint smell, like mildew mixed with something sweeter, something that made her stomach churn. She thought of Kaylee, of the cereal bowl, the tiara, the pink shoe, and took a step down, her flashlight beam barely piercing the darkness. The stairs creaked under her weight, and she froze, listening for any sound from below. Nothing, just the drip of water somewhere deep in the cellar. She kept going, her heart in her throat, each step pulling her closer to something she wasn't sure she could face. At the bottom, her light caught on a concrete floor, littered with old crates and cobwebs. But in the corner, half hidden behind a top, was something that made her blood freeze, a small mattress, stained and worn, with a tattered blanket draped over it. Next to it was a pile of clothes, small enough for a child. Linda's knees buckled, and she clutched the wall to keep from falling. Was this where Kaylee had been? She moved closer, her flashlight shaking, and saw something else, a drawing, scratched into the wall, of a little girl in a crown. Her breath caught. It was Kaylee's style, the way she used to draw herself in her pageant dresses. Linda reached out, her fingers tracing the lines, when a sound, a muffled thud, came from above, back at the house. She spun around, her light darting up the stairs. Someone was up there, and they didn't want her here. Marcus backed against the boxes, his flashlight trained on Mr. Ellis, whose smile didn't reach his eyes. Eleanor stepped in front of Marcus, her voice shaky but firm. "Leave him alone, Carl. He's just a kid." Mr. Ellis, Carl, laughed, a sound that made Marcus's skin crawl. "A kid who's poking around where he don't belong," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You should have stayed gone, Eleanor. You promised." Marcus's mind raced, piecing together fragments, the letter, the rhinestone, Eleanor's words about protecting her. Was it Kaylee? And what did Carl Ellis have to do with it? He thought of the newspaper articles, the unlocked back door at the community center, the dark car speeding away. Had Carl been there that night, not just as a janitor, but as something more? Marcus's hand slipped into his pocket, gripping the letter, ready to pull it out, to demand answers, but Carl took a step closer, his hand reaching into his jacket. "Give me what you found, kid," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus's heart pounded, but before he could move, a crash came from downstairs, loud and sharp, like metal hitting concrete. Carl's head snapped toward the sound, his smile vanishing. "What the hell?" he muttered, glancing at Eleanor. "You didn't come alone, did you?" Eleanor's face went white, and Marcus realized Linda must be in the house, or worse, in the cellar. The truth was closing in, but so was the danger, and Marcus didn't know if any of them would make it out. Linda scrambled back up the cellar stairs, the drawing of the crowned girl burned into her mind. The thud had come from above, maybe the boy she'd seen, or someone else, someone who'd left that mattress, those clothes, that drawing. Her flashlight flickered, the battery dying, and she cursed under her breath, gripping the tiara like a weapon. She reached the top, her light catching on the open cellar door, and stepped into the yard, her eyes darting to the house. A light flickered inside, not from the window she'd watched, but from an upstairs room. Her heart raced. She moved toward the window the boy had climbed through, her sneakers silent on the gravel, and peered inside. The living room was empty, but voices, low, tense, came from upstairs. She couldn't make out the words, but one was a woman's, another a man's, and a third, younger, maybe the boy's. Her mind flashed to Mrs. Hargrove, to Carl Ellis, to the quiet woman with sharp eyes. Were they here? Did they know what happened to Kaylee? She climbed through the window, her hands shaking, and landed softly, her light barely holding. The voices grew louder, and she crept toward the stairs, her breath shallow. She didn't know what she'd find, but the tiara, the drawing, the cereal bowl, they were all pointing to this moment, this house. As she reached the first step, a shout rang out from above, followed by a crash, like furniture toppling. Linda froze, her heart in her throat, and whispered, "Kaylee, I'm coming." The truth was up those stairs, but so was something dark, something that had been hidden for 3 years, and it wasn't letting go without a fight. Marcus ducked as Carl lunged, the man's hand grazing his jacket. Eleanor screamed, "Carl, stop," but he didn't listen, his eyes wild. Marcus stumbled back, the letter falling from his pocket, the rhinestone skittering across the floor. Carl's gaze snapped to it, his face twisting. "Where'd you get that?" he growled, stepping closer. Marcus's back hit the wall, his flashlight dropping, plunging the room into near darkness, the lantern's glow barely enough to see by. He thought of the note from the bus, the woman Eleanor standing in front of him, her hands raised like she could stop Carl. "He doesn't know anything," she pleaded, but Carl laughed, cold and bitter. "He knows enough to be here," he said, his hand pulling something from his jacket, a glint of metal that made Marcus's stomach drop. A knife. The crash downstairs echoed again, louder, and Carl's head whipped toward the door. "Who's with you?" he snarled, grabbing Eleanor's arm. Marcus saw his chance, diving for the rhinestone, his fingers closing around it just as Carl turned back. "Don't move, kid," he said, the knife flashing. Marcus froze, his heart pounding, the rhinestone cutting into his palm. He didn't know what Carl had done, but the letter, the rhinestone, Eleanor's fear, they were all tied to Kaylee, to that night in 1994. And now Linda was here, somewhere in the house, closer to the truth than she realized. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder, and Marcus's eyes met Eleanor's, her face a mask of regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered, just as the door burst open, and everything went to hell. The door at 1427 Maple burst open, and Linda stood frozen, her dying flashlight illuminating the tiara's bent frame. Her eyes locked on Marcus, then Eleanor, then Carl Ellis, whose knife glinted in the lantern's dim glow. "What did you do to my daughter?" she demanded, voice raw. Marcus's heart pounded, the rhinestone cutting into his palm, the letter crumpled on the floor. Eleanor stepped forward, trembling. "Linda, you don't understand," she pleaded. Carl's grip tightened, his cold smile fading. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, voice cracking with fear. Linda's gaze fell on the rhinestone in Marcus's hand. "That's Kaylee's," she whispered, tears spilling. Marcus tried to speak, but Carl lunged, knife flashing. Eleanor threw herself between them, and chaos erupted, Linda swinging the tiara, knocking the knife away, the lantern tipping, shadows swallowing the room. Marcus scrambled back, hitting boxes, the rhinestone clutched tight. Linda's swing grazed Carl's arm, and he dropped the knife, hissing. For a moment, they had him. But Carl grabbed Eleanor, using her as a shield. "Back off," he snarled. Linda froze, her flashlight shaking, catching Eleanor's terrified eyes. "Tell me about Kaylee," Linda said, voice steady despite her tears. Carl's laugh was bitter. "You won't like the truth." Marcus's mind raced, the letter's words, "I'm sorry. Had to protect her," screamed Kaylee. "Let her go," he said, stepping forward. Carl reached into his jacket, pulling a knife. "Give me what you found, kid." A crash downstairs, metal on concrete, made Carl flinch. "You didn't come alone," he snapped. Eleanor's face paled. Marcus realized Linda was here, maybe in the cellar, the truth closing in. Linda climbed from the cellar, the crowned girl's drawing burned into her mind. The mattress, the child's clothes, had Kaylee been here? A thud from above drove her to the house, her flashlight flickering. Voices, a woman, a man, a boy, drew her upstairs. She burst in, seeing Marcus, Eleanor, and Carl. "What did you do?" she demanded. Eleanor's voice broke. "I took Kaylee to protect her." Linda's knees buckled. "You stole her," she choked. Eleanor's tears fell. "She was scared, Linda. I gave her a new life." Carl smirked. "I helped, unlocked the door that night." Linda's world shattered. Marcus saw Eleanor's trembling hands, hiding more. "Where is she?" he demanded, knife in hand. Eleanor whispered, "Safe, in Oregon." But her eyes flickered, something was off. The cellar's clues screamed of secrets. "Take us to her," he said. As they moved to leave, a shadow shifted downstairs, a silent figure watching. Eleanor led them out, her steps heavy, to Linda's car. The night was cold, stars sharp above Willow Creek. Linda drove, knuckles white, the tiara beside her. Marcus watched Eleanor in the rearview, her hands twisting. Carl sat silent, defeated. The drive to Oregon stretched ahead, each mile heavier with hope and dread. Marcus gripped the rhinestone, the letter's words, "Protect her," haunting him. Why had Eleanor chosen him? In the back seat, Eleanor whispered, "She's happy, Linda. 9 now, with friends." Linda's sob broke the silence, her hands shaking. Marcus's stomach twisted. Eleanor's story didn't add up. The cellar's clues screamed of secrets. Final twist, as they crossed state lines, a phone rang. Eleanor's. She answered, voice low, then paled. "They found us," she whispered, eyes darting to Carl. Marcus's heart stopped. "Who?" "The police. Or someone else, someone tied to the shadow in the house." The car's headlights caught a figure on the road ahead, a woman, her face hidden, holding a child's shoe. Linda gasped, slamming the brakes. The truth was here, but it wasn't Eleanor's story, it was something darker, and they were all in its grip. The cottage was quiet as morning light filtered through the curtains, but Marcus couldn't relax, his eyes scanning the trees outside. The rhinestone sat on the table, a silent reminder of the journey, Kaylee's tiara, the cereal bowl, the letter, all leading to this moment. Linda and Katie sat together, their hands clasped, their voices soft as they began to rebuild what had been broken. Sarah returned from her calls, her face grim. "The police have Eleanor and Carl," she said. "They're talking, but the man asking about Katie is still out there." Marcus's stomach twisted. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah shook her head. "They don't know. Could be someone from the pageants, someone who knew Kaylee's value." Linda's face paled, her grip on Katie tightening. "Value," she whispered, her voice shaking. Katie looked down, her voice small. "Some people at the pageants, they watched me too closely. It scared me." Marcus's heart sank, the shadow at 1427 Maple taking shape, a predator, not a savior, hunting a child star. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she stepped outside to answer, her voice low but urgent. Marcus watched Linda and Katie, their bond fragile but growing. He thought of his own mom, waiting at home, worried about his late nights. He'd call her soon, tell her he was okay, but first, he needed to see this through. Sarah burst back in, her face ashen. "The police found him," she said, her voice tight. "He's been tracking Kaylee for months, using old pageant contacts. He's close, too close." Linda stood, her eyes wild. "We're not running again," she said, her voice fierce. Katie nodded, her face resolute. "I'm tired of hiding," she said, her voice stronger now. Marcus felt a surge of pride for her, for Linda, for himself. They weren't victims anymore, they were fighters. The police arrived, their lights flashing through the trees. A detective, a kind woman named Riley, sat with them, her notebook open. "We've got a name," she said. "Paul Grayson, a pageant organizer with a history of stalking young contestants. He's been obsessed with Kaylee since her first show." Linda's face twisted, guilt and rage mixing. "I didn't know," she whispered. Riley's voice was gentle. "You couldn't have. He's good at hiding." They set a trap, using the cottage as bait, and within hours, Grayson was caught, his car filled with photos of Kaylee, old and new. Katie watched from the window, her face calm but fierce. "He can't hurt me now," she said, and Linda pulled her close, their tears mixing. As the police took Grayson away, Marcus stepped outside, the rhinestone in his hand. He gave it to Katie, his voice soft. "This is yours," he said. She smiled, small but real, and slipped it into her pocket. Linda hugged him, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Marcus. You brought her back." He nodded, his throat tight, the weight of his role settling in. He'd been a kid with a note, but he'd become something more, a hero, not just for Kaylee, but for himself. Back in Willow Creek, he'd face his mom, his life, but he'd carry this moment forever. Linda and Katie stayed in the cottage, rebuilding their bond, while Sarah faced her own reckoning, her role in the secrecy weighing heavy. The town would heal, slowly, but the scars of Kaylee's disappearance would linger, a reminder to listen, to see, to care. Marcus walked to the truck, the dawn bright, the future open, and for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Takeaway: the story leaves us with a reflection on love's resilience, the power of truth, and the courage to face the past. Kaylee's journey, Linda's fight, and Marcus's bravery remind us that even in the darkest moments, hope can light the way, and kindness can change everything.